Hey everybody, Mr. Grove here. Today we're going to talk about the phylum Cnidaria. And so this is going to be basically the jellyfish, corals, Hydra, anemomies, and things that go into that category. And we are basically going to focus on three different classes in this phylum. And so that's going to be the class Hydrozoa, Scyphozoa, and Anthozoa. Now there are other classes, Cubozoa would be one, and there's several other classes, but these would be the three big ones that we concentrate in the phylum Cnidaria. So some kind of basic traits first. So we now have radial symmetry. So with the sponges, we had asymmetry, so no symmetry, but we now have radial symmetry. So that means around the center part, then it's going to radiate out into a circle. So radial symmetry. We're going to have tissues. So cells are going to start working together to form simple systems, and we'll have tissues. We can now extracellularly digest. So our jellyfish can eat things that are bigger than them because they're going to start to digest it down outside their cells. And so it doesn't have to be like the sponge that had food that had to be small enough to fit in the cells. And then the main kind of trait that we think of when we think of jellyfish is the stinging cells. And so the stinging cells, we'll talk about that in just a second, that is the Pneumaticysts. And so our body forms kind of come in two different kinds here. So we have what's called the medusa or the polyp. So a polyp is going to be when we're attached at the bottom and the tentacles kind of go upwards. So attached at the bottom, tentacles kind of go up. And this is going to be very common in our anemone groups. Okay, so for example, our Anthozoans. Okay, and then our medusas are going to be free floating, and they're going to have the mouth down as opposed to up, and the tentacles are going to be hanging down. And so we call that the medusa body form. So that kind of sets the stage for basic traits then of the phylum Cnidaria. So we do have tissues, like we said, and that stinging cell is called a cnidocyte. That's the name of the cell. And then the stinging component is going to be the Pneumaticist. And so this is a pressure sensor. So it's going to have a little trigger like a mousetrap. And when that trigger gets hit, it will fire out. And this little barbed wire kind of needle will then go in to the prey and maybe put a toxin or venom in that would paralyze or maybe even kill. And then that will allow the Cnidarian to pull the food prey into its gastrovascular cavity where it will start to digest it, and then it will disperse that nutrients to all of the cells. And so that is the way the Pneumaticysts work. And so the cnidocytes are the name of the cell, and then the Pneumaticist is the trigger mechanism on that cnidocyte. Okay, and like we said, unlike sponges, we can now extracellularly digest, so our food can be bigger than our cells. So that's a big deal. So let's talk Hydrogelns. So ballpark of about 2,700 species. They are both polyp and medusa. So one example of a hydrozoan that would be in a medusa form would be the Portuguese man of war. So these get really large, long tentacles, have kind of a gas bubble dome that they'll float around in, and then as they capture prey with their stinging tentacles on the Pneumaticist, they will coil that prey back up into the gastrovascular cavity, and that will allow them to feed. The Hydra are also, these are little freshwater guys. They're about the size of your pinky fingernail, and they're very common. So we see these here in Bond County in freshwater ponds and stuff. There's green Hydra and brown Hydra, and so the green Hydra are going to have a little bit of photosynthesis ability, and so they can make a little bit of their own food in addition to capturing it. And so that would be kind of a polyp type. Okay, is the Hydra. And they actually have a cool little trick that they can do. They attach with this basal disc, and then when they want to let go, a lot of times they'll just do this cool tumble-like thing until they find a new spot to attach back to. And another one is called the Obelia, and this is kind of a colonial hydrozoan. And so the Obelia will have both a medusa stage and then also a stage where it is a polyp. Okay, and so in this case, the life cycle of the Obelia, so we've got our male medusa, female medusa, sperm swim towards the egg, egg will form a planula, which is kind of like the larva stage, and then that planula finds a spot and then starts growing its colony from that. And so those are the Hydrozoans, so like we said, around the 2,700 species mark. Scyphozoans are going to be kind of our true jellies, and notice our species is way down. Okay, so the majority of our Cnidarians are definitely not what we would think of as true jellyfish. And so these are going to be mostly saltwater and then mostly spending their time in the medusa stage. And so these are going to be floating around. So Obelia is one. It's a very common one. I think the tanked guys did a Spencer's fish aquarium where they used Obelia jellyfish to look like the lava in the lava lamp for the Spencer's store. Another jellyfish related, and so this is the cubozoans. So cubozoa would technically be its own class, but they're kind of closely related to the scyphozoans. And we give this guy a little bit of say because he is a really, really deadly jellyfish. So this is what we call the box jellyfish. You can see its dome is a little bit more box-shaped. And the sting can be fatal if there's enough toxin that is delivered to a human even. Okay, so those are the medusa kind, so scyphozoan, and then the cubozoans a little bit. And then our anthozoans, these are going to be mostly polyps. And so these are our anemomies, our sea fans, our corals. And as you can see number-wise, they definitely make up the majority of the Cnidarians. And so really good at building these large polyp communities. Some of them, like in the corals, will develop kind of a calcium backbone skeleton. And these can be huge. I mean, coral reefs can be seen from space, and the coral will live symbiotically with algae to where that coral will get some of its food then from the algae. In the case of the anemomies, so you've probably seen how like a clownfish has a symbiotic relationship with an anemone. So the fish swims in, gets a nice protective house. Nobody wants to mess with it because of all those stinging tentacles. But then Nemo's a messy eater, so he drops food and crumbs in there, and so the anemone gets some food in a meal. So that is the Cnidarians, and those are our classes, Anthozoa, Scyphozoa, and Hydrozoa for the phylum Cnidaria. And I hope that was helpful.